Maria Rodriguez pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway of Sterling Tech Industries, her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floor that reflected the dim emergency lights overhead. It was 11:30 at night, and the building was mostly empty except for a few workaholics still hunched over their computers in distant offices. She had been working as a night janitor here for 3 years, ever since her husband left her with their daughter Sophia, who was now 7 years old and had cerebral palsy, requiring constant medical attention and therapy that insurance barely covered. So Maria worked this job from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., then rushed home to get Sophia ready for school before catching a few hours of sleep. And doing it all over again, she stopped at the large glass conference room on the 40th floor and began wiping down the table that still had coffee rings and scattered papers from the executive meeting that had ended hours ago. But as she worked, she heard a sound, a soft humming coming from the corner of the room. Maria turned and saw him, a boy who looked about 9 years old, sitting on the floor near the window, rocking gently back and forth, his hands flapping in a rhythmic pattern that she recognized immediately because Sophia did similar movements when she was overwhelmed or trying to process the world around her. The boy had dark hair that fell over his eyes, and he wore an expensive shirt and pants that were now wrinkled from sitting on the floor for what must have been hours. Maria glanced around but saw no one else. The meeting had been over since 9, and it was now almost midnight. Where were his parents? Who would leave a child alone like this? She approached slowly, not wanting to startle him, and knelt down a few feet away, keeping her distance, but making sure he knew she was there. "Hello, sweetheart," she said softly. "Are you okay? Do you need help finding your mom or dad?" The boy did not look at her, but his humming changed pitch slightly, and his rocking slowed just a fraction. Maria waited patiently. She knew from Sophia that sometimes it took time for children with special needs to process and respond, and she was not going to rush him or make him feel pressured. After a long moment, the boy spoke in a quiet voice that was barely above a whisper. "Dad is in his office. He does not like when I interrupt. He says I need to learn to be independent." Maria's heart broke a little hearing those words spoken in such a matter-of-fact way, as if this child had been told this so many times that he had accepted it as truth. She looked at the boy's face and suddenly recognized him. She had seen his photo on the desk in the corner office, the massive office that belonged to James Sterling, the CEO of this entire company. This was his son, Ethan. "Your dad is Mr. Sterling?" she asked gently, and Ethan nodded, still not making eye contact. "I am sure he did not mean to leave you alone for so long. He is probably very busy with work. Would you like me to take you to him?" "No," Ethan said quickly, his rocking becoming more pronounced again. "He gets angry when I go to his office during work. He says it makes him look unprofessional in front of his employees. I am supposed to wait here until he is done." Maria felt anger rising in her chest. How could a father treat his own child this way, especially a child who clearly needed extra attention and understanding? But she kept her voice calm and warm because she knew Ethan needed comfort, not more stress. "Well, you know what," she said, sitting down on the floor across from him, crossing her legs. "I think waiting alone is not very fun. How about I wait with you while I take my break? Would that be okay for?" The first time, Ethan stopped rocking completely, and his eyes flickered toward her face for just a second before darting away again. He seemed to be considering her offer, and then he gave a small nod. Maria smiled and pulled out her small lunch bag from her cleaning cart, extracting a sandwich she had made that morning. "Do you like peanut butter and jelly?" she asked. "I always make extra just in case." Ethan nodded again, more enthusiastically this time, and Maria handed him half of her sandwich. They sat together in comfortable silence while they ate, and Maria noticed that Ethan seemed to relax slightly, his shoulders dropping from their tense position, his hands no longer flapping as frantically. After they finished eating, Ethan finally spoke again, his voice still quiet but little stronger. "You are nice. Most people pretend they do not see." Memora's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "I see you, Ethan," she said firmly. "You are a wonderful person, and anyone who does not see that is missing out." Ethan looked at her again, this time holding her gaze for almost 3 full seconds, which Maria knew was significant for a child on the autism spectrum. "Thank you," he whispered from. That night on, Maria made it a point to check on Ethan whenever she saw him in the building, which was often because apparently James Sterling frequently brought his son to work, claiming he could not find adequate childcare. But Maria suspected the truth was that James was embarrassed by his son's autism and did not want to hire someone who would witness his lack of patience and understanding. So instead, he brought Ethan along and left him to entertain himself in various corners of the building. Aria began bringing extra snacks and small toys for Ethan. She learned that he loved dinosaurs and could recite facts about every species from the Triassic period through the Cretaceous extinction. She discovered that he was brilliant at math and could solve complex problems in his head that would take most adults a calculator and multiple attempts. She found out that he loved music, especially classical piano, and that he had perfect pitch, but had never been given lessons because his father thought it was a waste of money. When Ethan could not even have a normal conversation, the other employees at Sterling Tech treated Ethan the way they treated Maria, as if both were invisible furniture that existed only to serve a purpose but was not worth acknowledging. As human, Maria watched as executives stepped over Ethan's legs when he sat in hallways. She saw assistants roll their eyes when Ethan made his humming sounds. She witnessed managers complain to each other about James bringing that weird kid to the office again, as if Ethan could not hear them, as if he did not understand exactly what they meant. But Maria also saw something else. She saw how Ethan watched his father, desperately hoping for a smile or a kind word or just 5 minutes of undivided Tory tension. She saw how Ethan's face would light up when James walked past and how it would crumble when James did not even glance his way. She saw how Ethan tried so hard to be quiet and still and invisible, just like his father wanted, and it made her furious because she knew that Ethan deserved so much better. One evening, about 6 months after Maria first met Ethan, she was cleaning the executive bathroom when she overheard a conversation between James Sterling and his assistant Patricia in the hallway outside. "The gala is in 2 weeks," James was saying, "and I need everything to be perfect. We are announcing the merger with TechVision, and there will be investors from all over the world attending. This is the biggest night of my career." "Of course, Mr. Sterling," Patricia replied. "What about Ethan? Will he be attending?" James sighed heavily. "I do not have a choice. My ex-wife is traveling and refuses to take him, even though it is her weekend. Apparently, her new husband does not want to deal with Ethan's issues. So, yes, I will have to bring him. I will just tell him to sit in the back and stay quiet. Hopefully no one will notice him." Maria gripped her mop handle so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to march out there and tell James Sterling exactly what she thought of him, but she knew she would lose her job immediately, and she could not afford that. Sophia needed her, but the thought of Ethan sitting alone at that gala, being ignored and treated as an embarrassment, made her want to cry. 2 weeks later, Maria was assigned to work the gala event. All janitors had been called in to help with setup and cleanup, and to be available throughout the evening in case of any spills or emergencies. Maria wore her standard uniform, dark blue pants and a matching shirt with her name tag, and she pushed her cart to a corner of the massive ballroom where she would wait until needed. The ballroom was stunning. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow prisms across the white marble floors round. Tables covered in silk cloths were arranged throughout the space, each with elaborate centerpieces of white roses and orchids. A stage had been set up at one end with a podium and a large screen for presentations, and along one wall was a buffet table that stretched at least 50 feet, loaded with expensive foods that Maria could not even name. Even name guests began arriving at 7, dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns dripping with jewelry that probably cost more than Maria made in a year. She watched from her corner as they air-kissed and laughed and sipped champagne from crystal flutes. Servers in crisp white jackets circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres. and more drinks, while a string quartet played softly from another corner. Maria spotted James Sterling immediately. He was tall with silver hair and a commanding presence, wearing a custom tuxedo and a confident smile. As he shook hands and slapped backs, working the room like the seasoned executive he was, and then Maria saw Ethan trailing behind his father, wearing a small tuxedo that looked uncomfortable on his thin frame. His hair was slicked back in a way that looked wrong, and he was tugging at his bow tie with one hand while the other hand flapped anxiously at his side. James turned and said something sharp to Ethan that Maria could not hear, but she saw Ethan immediately drop his hands and go still his face. James pointed to a chair against the far wall away from the main crowd, and Ethan walked over and sat down, folding his hands in his lap and staring at the floor. Maria's heart ached, watching him sit there so alone in a room full of hundreds of people. She wanted to go to him, but she was working, and she was not supposed to interact with guests unless they needed something cleaned. So she stayed in her corner and watched as the evening progressed. Dinner was served. James gave a speech about the merger that was met with applause and cheers. Investors stood up to toast the success of Sterling. Tech and champagne flowed freely. The string quartet was replaced by a DJ, and soon people were dancing, filling the center of the ballroom with swirling gowns and laughing faces through it all. Ethan sat in his chair against the wall, not moving, not speaking, not acknowledged by a single person. Maria saw him watching the dancers, with a look of longing on his face, his foot tapping slightly to the rhythm of the music, and she knew that he wanted to be part of it, to feel included, to experience the joy that everyone else was experiencing. But he had been told to stay in his chair, and so he did, like a good, obedient boy who had learned not to expect anything more. Maria made a decision. She set down her spray bottle and stepped out from behind her cart. She walked across the ballroom, weaving between dancing couples and chatting groups, ignoring the surprised looks from a few people who noticed the janitor walking through the party. She walked right up to Ethan and knelt down beside his chair. "Hello, Ethan," she said warmly, and his head snapped up, his eyes widening with recognition and relief. "Maria," he said her name like it was a lifeline. "You are here." "I'm here," she confirmed, "and I was watching you sit over here all by yourself, and I thought that was not fair at all because you deserve to have fun too. So, I have a question for you. Would you like to dance with me?" Ethan's eyes went even wider, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then he looked around the room at all the people who had ignored him all night, at his father who was across the room, deep in conversation with investors and not even looking in his direction. Ethan looked back at Maria, and she saw fear in his eyes, but also hope. "I do not know how to dance," he whispered. "That is okay," Maria said. "I am not very good at it either, but we can figure it out together. What do you say?" Ethan hesitated for one more second, and then he stood up and took Maria's hand, his small fingers gripping hers tightly as if he was afraid she might disappear. Maria led him onto the dance floor, right into the middle of all those important people in their expensive clothes, and she placed his hands on her waist while she rested hers on his shoulders, and they began to sway to the music. At first, no one noticed. They were just another pair among many. But gradually, people began to turn and stare. The janitor in her work uniform, dancing with the CEO's autistic son, the boy who was supposed to be invisible, quietly sitting in the corner, not drawing attention to himself. Couples stopped dancing too. Watch conversations paused. The music seemed to get quieter as more and more people noticed what was happening. Maria felt the weight of their stares, but she did not care. She kept her eyes on Ethan, who was looking up at her with pure joy on his face. His movements were not smooth or coordinated. His hands flapped occasionally when he got excited, and he sometimes stepped on her feet, but he was smiling, a real, genuine smile that lit up his entire face, and that was all that mattered to Maria then. Someone tapped on a microphone, and the music stopped completely. Maria looked up and saw that James Sterling was standing at the podium, staring directly at her. And Ethan, his face was red with anger or embarrassment. Maria could not tell which, and her heart sank. She had known this might happen, that she might lose her job for this. But seeing James, standing there looking at his own son with such displeasure, made her realize it was worth that everyone was silent, waiting to see what the CEO would do. James opened his mouth to speak, and Maria braced herself for whatever was coming, but before James could say a word, Ethan did something unexpected. He let go of Maria and walked toward the stage, toward his father. Every eye in the room followed. Hemathan climbed the steps to the stage, his legs shaking slightly, and he took the microphone from his father's hand. James looked shocked and tried to take it back, but Ethan held firm and spoke into the microphone, his voice amplified throughout. "The ballroom, my name is Ethan Sterling." Ethan said his words careful and deliberate. "I am 9 years old and I have autism. Most of you do not know me, even though I have been coming to this building for years. You walk past me like I am not there. You do not say hello, you do not smile at me, you act like I am invisible because I am different, because I do not talk the way you talk or move the way you move." Room was completely silent, everyone frozen in place. James stood beside his son, his face pale and stricken. "But Maria sees me," Ethan continued. "She always sees me. She talks to me like I am a person. She shares her food with me. She asks me about dinosaurs and math and music. She makes me feel like I matter. And tonight when I was sitting alone, she asked me to dance with her, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because she thinks I deserve to have fun just like everyone else." Stares were streaming down Maria's face now. She could see other people in the crowd wiping their tates and wiping their eyes too. Even the tough-looking investors and executives seemed moved by this young boy's words. "My dad is a very important man," Ethan said, looking up at James, who now had tears running down his own face. "He runs this whole company and everyone respects him, but he does not have time for me. He brings me to work because he has to, not because he wants me here. He tells me to be quiet, to stay out of the way, to be invisible because he is ashamed of me, because I am not normal." James made a choked sound and reached for his son, but Ethan was not finished. "But Maria is just a janitor. Everyone here thinks that means she is not important, that her job does not matter, but she has taught me more about kindness and respect and love than anyone else in this building. She does not have money or power, but she has something better. She has a good heart, and tonight she showed all of you what it means to really see someone, to really care about another person, not because of what they can do for you, but just because they are human." Ethan handed the microphone back to his father, and then he walked off the stage, back to Maria, and wrapped his arms around her waist, hugging her tightly. Maria hugged him back, tears falling onto the top of his head. And the entire ballroom erupted in applause, not polite golf claps, but real thunderous applause that shook the chandeliers. James Sterling stood at the podium, staring at his son, at Maria, at all the people who were now standing, giving them a standing ovation, and something broke inside him. All the walls he had built, all the excuses he had made, all the times he had chosen his career over his son came crashing down, and he saw clearly for the first time what he had been doing, how he had been failing the person who mattered most. James walked down from the stage, and across the dance floor people parted to let him through. He reached Maria and Ethan, and he knelt down in front of his son, taking his hands. "Ethan," James said, his voice breaking, "I am so sorry. I have been a terrible father. I let my own fears and insecurities make me blind to what an amazing person you are. I was afraid of what people would think, afraid that having a son with autism made me look weak or incapable. And I let that fear hurt you in ways I can never fully repair. But I promise you right here, right now, in front of all these people, that things are going to change. I am going to be the father you deserve. I am going to see you, really see you the way Maria does." Ethan looked at his father, searching his face for sincerity, and then he nodded. "Okay, Dad," he whispered. James pulled his son into a fierce hug, and then he looked up at Maria. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for showing me what I was too blind to see. You did not have to do what you did tonight. You could have lost your job. You could have been humiliated, but you put my son's happiness above all of that, and I will never forget it." Maria smiled through her tears. "I did not do anything special," she said. I just treated Ethan the way every child deserves to be treated. That is where you are wrong, James said, standing up. What you did was extraordinary, and I want to make sure everyone here understands that. He turned to face the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I have spent my entire career building this company, measuring success by profits and market share and growth percentages. But tonight I realized that, I have been measuring the wrong things. The most important success is not in boardrooms or bank accounts. It is in how we treat each other, especially those who society tells us do not matter. James looked at Maria again. Starting tomorrow, Maria Rodriguez will no longer be working as a janitor. She will be the new Director of Workplace Culture and Inclusion at Sterling Tech, with a full salary, benefits, and the authority to implement programs that make this company a place where everyone is valued, where people like my son are not just tolerated but celebrated. The crowd erupted in applause again, and Maria stood there in shock, unable to process what had just happened. She tried to speak, but no words came out. James smiled at her. "You deserve this," he said, "and so much more." The rest of the evening was a blur. People came up to Maria and Ethan, congratulating them, thanking them, sharing their own stories of family members with autism or other disabilities, and how seeing what happened tonight had touched them. Investors pledged donations to autism research and support organizations. Employees promised to be more aware, more inclusive, more kind. But the best moment came at the very end of the night, when the last guests had left, and it was just Maria, Ethan, and James standing in the empty ballroom. The cleaning crew Maria usually worked with was starting to come in, but they smiled and waved at her, whispering congratulations as they passed. Ethan tugged on Maria's sleeve. "Can we dance one more time?" he asked. "Just ooze." Maria looked at James, who nodded with a warm smile. "Of course," she said, and she took Ethan's hands again. This time James joined them, putting one hand on Ethan's shoulder and one on Maria's, and the three of them swayed together in the empty ballroom to the memory of music that had played hours before. As they danced, Maria thought about Sophia, waiting at home with the neighbor who watched her, and she thought about how she would be able to afford better care for her daughter. Now, better therapy, better equipment, a better life. She thought about Ethan and how his life was about to change, to how his father was finally going to be present, to really see him. And she thought about how one moment of kindness, one decision to step out from the shadows and acknowledge another person had changed everything. That is the thing about compassion. Maria realized it does not require wealth or power or status. It just requires willingness to see people, truly see them in all their messy, complicated, beautiful humanity. And when we do that, when we choose connection over convenience, when we choose love over fear, we create ripples that spread far beyond what we can imagine. 3 months later, Maria sat in her new office on the 42nd floor with windows overlooking the city. She had implemented a dozen new programs at Sterling Tech, including sensitivity training for Sterling training, and for all employees, a mentorship program for employees with disabilities, on-site resources for parents with special needs children, and regular community outreach events. But her favorite part of her new job was the weekly lunch she had every Friday with Ethan in the company cafeteria, where they still talked about dinosaurs and math and music, and where other employees now stopped by to join them, asking Ethan questions, listening to his stories, treating him like the brilliant, incredible kid he was. James had kept his promise. He now left work at 5 every day to have dinner with Ethan. He attended Ethan's therapy sessions and school meetings. He enrolled Ethan in piano lessons and sat in the audience, beaming with pride at every recital. He learned about autism not as a disorder to be ashamed of, but as a different way of experiencing the world that came with unique challenges, but also unique gifts. And sometimes, late at night, when Maria was finally home with Sophia, tucking her into bed, her daughter would ask her to tell the story again, the story of the night Mama danced with the boy at the fancy party, and Maria would tell it, smiling at the memory, but always ending with the same words. The lesson, sweetheart, is that every single person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, and the smallest act of kindness, the simple choice to see someone, to acknowledge their worth, to treat them with dignity, can change Everything, not just for them, but for you too, because when we lift others up, we lift ourselves, and that is how we make the world a better place. One dance, one moment, one connection at a time. And Sophia would nod sleepily and whisper, "I want to be like you, Mama." And Maria would kiss her forehead and whisper, "Back, you already are, baby. You already are."